In early 1800s rural Ireland, most families lived close to the edge. Landholdings stayed small, rents stayed demanding, and a bad year in any crop usually meant hunger. Then one plant changed the calculation. The potato yielded heavily on poor soil, and it fed people fast. A single plot provided enough calories to carry a household through the year. It looked like a solution. Once the potato proved itself, it quietly reorganized daily survival. Families planted it first because it filled stomachs more reliably than grain. It required less land, less cash, and less time away from home. Children ate it morning and night. Adults carried it to the fields. Even when wages dipped or prices rose, the potato kept meals coming. In many places, it became the diet. That dependence did not feel like a gamble at the time. It felt like security earned from hard experience. Each harvest reinforced the lesson. This crop worked, even when other options failed, so more ground shifted toward potatoes, and fewer families kept a cushion of other foods. The country did not announce this change in a single decision. It happened season by season, and it tightened. The potato's success solved an immediate problem, and it did it so well that it quietly changed how people ate. Meals grew simpler. A family that once needed several crops to get through the year leaned harder and harder on one. That felt efficient, even sensible, because it worked day after day. But that kind of success carried a trap. When one food carried most of the calories, there were fewer backups left. The same narrowing happened in the fields. To keep pace with demand, growers repeated what gave dependable harvests, planting the same favored potatoes again and again. Over time, huge areas ended up filled with plants that were close relatives, almost copies. That looked like stability because the rows kept producing. Yet it also meant the crop shared the same weaknesses. When one plant struggled, many struggled for the same reason. Fragility did not announce itself with a warning sign. It hid inside routine. The system depended on sameness, the same crop, the same varieties, the same expectation that next season resembled the last. That made planning easy and survival predictable, until it did not. In a diverse food system, trouble usually stayed local. Here, trouble had a clear path to travel. One threat could reach nearly everyone, all at once. In 1845, the potato fields still promised what they always had, enough to get through the year. Then something new arrived. It was a plant disease, later called blight, and people did not understand it at first. One week a plot looked healthy. Not long after, the leaves darkened and collapsed. Underground, the tubers turned soft and spoiled. Food failed before it even reached the table. The shock spread fast because it did not stay in one corner. As the season moved on, more districts reported the same pattern: strong growth, then sudden rot. Harvest time usually meant security, and families counted on the sacks they stored to last through winter. In 1845, many dug up fields that looked full but yielded little that could be kept. A first failure like this already changed how people planned every day. This first collapse was not total everywhere, but it was widespread enough to break the assumption that the crop was dependable. The blight moved on air and moisture, and it struck in bursts, making it hard to predict and harder to stop. People saved what they could, ate what they could not store, and tried to stretch the rest. The problem was simple and brutal. The main food did not last, and the year was not yet over. After the first failed harvest, many people still believed it had been a one-time shock. They had stretched what they could, borrowed what they could, and waited for the next season to fix everything. Then the blight returned. Fields that should have offered relief produced the same collapse again, and the gap between need and supply widened fast. It stopped being a bad year. It became a trap. With 2 failures in a row, the math no longer worked. Seed potatoes disappeared into cooking pots. Families ate sooner and ate less, trying to make time last. As supplies shrank, prices rose and small reserves vanished. Work did not solve it, because food was not simply expensive, it was missing. Hunger shifted from worry to weakness. People lost strength to plant, harvest, and recover. That cycle tightened. And as bodies weakened, sickness spread. Crowded households and constant movement in search of food carried infection from place to place. Simple illnesses that might have been survived in good times turned deadly when people had been starving for months. Fever and stomach diseases followed the hunger, feeding on exhaustion and poor nutrition. Scarcity did not just empty stomachs, it opened the door for disease, and it began to take lives. As the famine deepened, people looked to the state for rescue. Officials did step in, but the help rarely matched the scale of the need. Public works offered wages, yet the work demanded strength that hunger had already taken away. Soup kitchens appeared, then rules shifted again. Relief came with forms, inspections, and conditions. Every change cost time, and time now meant survival. At the same moment, the land system kept running as if nothing had changed. Rent still came due. Many small farmers had no harvest to sell, so arrears piled up fast. Landlords faced their own debts and chose the quickest fix: clear the tenants. Evictions moved from threat to routine. Houses were emptied, plots were taken back, and families lost the one thing that anchored them. Relief, when it arrived, often followed the logic of property, not hunger. Aid could be tied to giving up a holding, entering a workhouse, or proving absolute ruin. Some people were pushed off the land to qualify. Others were pushed off because they no longer paid. The result was the same. The famine stopped being only a crop failure. It became a forced unmaking of rural life. With food gone and rent still demanded, many households ran out of choices. They left cabins and small plots that no longer held anything to eat. Some walked for days, weak and already sick, aiming for the nearest town or harbour, because that was where a way out existed. Ports swelled fast. Lines formed for tickets, for scraps, for any work. The famine stopped being local. It started moving. Shipping agents and landlords' representatives funneled people toward departure, and the promise sounded simple: cross the ocean and start again. The reality looked different. Families were packed onto overcrowded vessels with too little food, too little clean water, and almost no space. Many boarded already carrying fever and dysentery from the hunger years. On long voyages, sickness spread quickly. A ship did not just transport people, it transported the crisis. Those who survived reached places like Liverpool, Canada, and the United States, exhausted and often ill, with little money left and no certainty of shelter. Quarantine stations and hospitals filled, and local authorities struggled to handle the sudden arrivals. Some migrants moved on inland. Others stayed near the docks, searching for wages immediately. Trauma came with them too: loss, eviction, hunger, shaping how they trusted, worked, and built new lives far from home. By the time the worst years passed, Ireland did not simply return to normal. Too many people had died, and too many others had left. Whole townlands lost families in clusters, and the routines that kept rural life running broke apart. Labour vanished from fields that once needed many hands. Schools and chapels served thinner congregations. In some places, a short walk crossed abandoned holdings where no one came back to plant again. This shrinking population changed how land got used. Small plots that had supported dense communities stopped making sense when tenants disappeared and rents went unpaid. Farms merged not by careful planning but by absence. A neighbour took over a strip. A landlord cleared several cabins and let the ground lie or turned it into grazing. Mixed, crowded settlement gave way to wider fields and fewer roofs. The countryside looked emptier because it was emptier, and the change stayed. The old system of tiny, potato-based subsistence holdings weakened, and a different rural order took its place, centred on larger farms and fewer people. Marriage happened later, if it happened at all, because land and security felt harder to guarantee. The memory of sudden hunger pushed families to avoid the old risks. Ireland's population did not quickly recover. The famine rewrote the human map, and it rewrote it for generations. In places like Boston, New York, and Liverpool, the Irish did not just arrive and blend in. They arrived in huge numbers, quickly enough to reshape entire neighbourhoods and job markets. Most started at the bottom, taking the hardest and lowest paid work available, from docks and canals to domestic service. Their wages fed families, but they also set off backlash. In the new countries, Irish became a label people argued about. Those crowded communities then turned survival into organisation. Churches, aid societies, and tight family networks helped new arrivals find work and housing, and they passed news and money back across the ocean. Over time, numbers became influence. In American cities, Irish voters and ward politics grew side by side, pushing for jobs, services, and protection in streets that often treated them as outsiders. In Liverpool, the Irish presence pressed on policing, welfare, and public health. A generation later, the impact reached beyond Labour and elections. Irish music, parades, newspapers, and a strong Catholic identity became public, not private, and that visibility changed what national culture looked like in the cities that absorbed them. The diaspora also stayed connected to Ireland, funding relatives and causes, and carrying memories of eviction and hunger into politics abroad. The famine ended at home, but it kept moving through people. When the worst years ended, the crisis did not end with them. Hunger and eviction stayed in people's minds as proof that the system had failed them. Many remembered food leaving the country while families collapsed at home, and they linked that fact to power being held elsewhere. The famine turned suffering into a political verdict. It did not just weaken communities, it changed what many believed British rule meant. That memory spread through surviving villages and through families scattered abroad. Letters and remittances kept people connected, but so did anger and a sense of being abandoned. The famine gave old complaints a new weight. Land, rents, and laws no longer sounded like distant issues. They sounded like life and death. Support grew for campaigns that demanded control over Irish affairs. The question shifted from reforming hardship to preventing it from ever happening again. Over time, political organising drew strength from shared stories of loss. Commemorations, newspapers, and public meetings kept the famine present not as history, but as a warning. Each new dispute over land or governance carried that shadow, and compromise became harder. A generation that had watched homes emptied did not easily trust promises from London. The famine became a turning point because it taught millions one lesson: dependence could kill, and self-government looked like survival. By the time the famine years faded into history, Ireland no longer depended on a single crop to keep people alive. Farms and markets shifted. Food came from more than one field, more than one plant, and that mattered. A country that once balanced its survival on potatoes had moved over generations toward a wider diet and a different economy. The old trap of one staple did not disappear overnight, but it did break. In the modern era, Ireland became food secure, and it even exported food. That fact carried a hard contrast. The land that once could not protect its own people now produced for global trade. The potato stayed, but it lost its power over life and death. Bread, meat, dairy, and imported foods shared the table. Choice replaced dependence. Yet the change in diet did not erase what had happened to the population or where so many families had gone. The scars showed up in numbers and in memory. Communities that vanished never returned, and generations grew up with relatives across oceans as a normal part of family life. Politics carried the famine like a weight, shaping how people viewed authority and security. Culture carried it too, in stories and anniversaries that refused to fade. Ireland stood as a modern exporter, but the distance from that early 1800s dependence remained the point. The break had a cost.